Welcome to part 2 of our competency-based grading series, where I turn uncertainty around grading into understanding. In part 1, we looked at the purposes of grades in our districts, and today we'll explore understanding our grade scale. Let's start with a basic definition. A grade scale is a system or guide that provides an explanation of the grades a student earns. In your own or your child's lifetime, you may have seen several different grade scales. Here are several examples of various types of grading scales. Here's today's truth about grading. Regardless of the method or scale used, grading and reporting are naturally subjective. When a teacher or anyone grades a student, they are evaluating and judging them. And to judge is to form an opinion or conclusion about. Indeed, the root of to judge is from the Latin meaning to decide the law or what is right. Just like real judges do, teachers look at evidence and a student's work, and perhaps other factors, unfortunately, and then they make a decision about what is the right grade. It is ultimately a subjective process, but subjectivity isn't always bad. Teachers usually know their students and have watched their students progress over time and multiple pieces of work. So a teacher's subjective perceptions may yield very accurate descriptions of what students have learned. But subjectivity can be dangerous too. When subjectivity translates into bias, either positive or negative bias, the accuracy of grades falls. Teachers' perceptions of students' behavior, for example, can significantly influence their judgments of academic achievement. It's human nature to have biases or natural inclinations. It's human nature to make judgments. We're all humans, teachers included. So we have to choose a grading method that limits damaging subjectivity and promotes healthy subjectivity. A quick reminder that our district's purpose for grades is to communicate students' academic achievement of priority competencies to students and their parents or guardians. So, if our purpose is to describe for students and families a student's learning progress, and if we want to limit bad subjectivity, the grading scale that works best is a 4 or 5 point scale. A 4 or 5 point scale aligns best with competency-based grading, in which students are scored on their mastery or progress toward mastery of a given competency or standard. At Governor Wentworth and Middleton, we use a 4-point scale which allows us to determine and communicate clear indicators of levels of proficiency or academic achievement. Let's see what I mean with a real-world example. Pause this video and give me a round of applause for 5 or so seconds. So welcome back. Now let's grade our fine young clappers. With a 4-point scale, we can develop clear levels of performance, what is proficient as well as what is above and below proficient. We look at the actual standard to determine what a student must do to be considered proficient. This is the goal, although we always want students to exceed the goal. Once we clarify proficiency, then we use our professional expertise as educators to determine what it means to be highly proficient, approaching proficient, and not yet making progress toward proficiency. If I focus on Camden, the clapper furthest to the right in the video, his performance met the criteria of the 2 level. He's making progress toward proficiency in providing applause, but he's not yet showing me that he's meeting the criteria to be proficient. I would use this same scale to grade Sawyer, and you can use it to grade your own applause. Were you proficient? Now let's create performance indicators for a 100-point scale. Here's the criteria for 100. And here's what you have to do to earn a 99, and 98, and 97. Oh boy, I have 34 more different levels of proficiency to figure out. That's a lot. And I placed the proficient level from the previous rubric, what would come from what the standard of competency says meets, at 85. But that was arbitrary on my part. In some traditional scales, 75 is considered proficient, while others consider 80 or 90 or even 92 the proficient level. And I'm still not done with this rubric. I have to write performance criteria for 65 different levels of failing, which, as an aside, if you think about it, is crazy. There are nearly 30 more levels of failing than passing in a traditional 100-point scale. One rubric would take me hours to complete, and it's darn near impossible to come up with 100 different levels of performance. And when we use a 100-point scale on the teacher's end, but then convert and report out in a smaller scale, like A, B, C, D, F, or 1, 2, 3, 4, we're still doing a disservice to our kids. Consider the B range, which is often considered 80 to 89. There are 9 points of difference between an 80 and 89, but they're still both considered a B. There's only 1 point of difference between 79 and 80, but each represents a completely different letter grade. Let's be clear. There is no discernible difference in mastery between an 81 and 82, or between an 89 and a 90. It's within the statistical margin of error, yet whole futures are built or destroyed because we sort students this way. And studies consistently show that the more levels you have in a grading scale, the more subjective and less accurate that students' grades are. So finally, here is our grading scale at Governor Wentworth in Middleton. We have a 4-point scale. The standards and competencies tell us the specifics about what a student must know and be able to do with that knowledge for any given subject area: math, social studies, health, anything. But 3 is proficient and means overall that the student with limited errors grasps key concepts, processes, and skills related to the standard and understands and applies them independently. A 2 then is progressing toward or approaching proficiency and means that the student is beginning to grasp key concepts, processes, and skills, but demonstrates inconsistent understanding and needs support. A 1 means that the student is not yet making progress. They're not yet demonstrating that basic understanding. And finally, the 4 is advanced proficiency, which means that the student with relative ease understands, applies, generalizes, and extends key concepts, processes, and skills consistently and independently. I find this analogy helpful. If proficient is riding a 2-wheel bike, then needing training wheels or the balancing help of an adult is progressing toward proficiency. Needing a 3rd wheel all of the time isn't demonstrating progress toward riding a 2-wheeler. And being able to perform some cool stunts is showing advanced proficiency. On assessments, teachers can enter half points, so they can enter 1.5, 2.5, and 3.5 to indicate that a student is between the whole point levels. To extend the bike metaphor, a 3.5 is a student who can ride well on their own and is beginning to do some basic stunts, but not consistently. Lastly, our grade scale includes 2 non-number scores, an M, which stands for missing and carries no numeric value, and an I, which stands for incomplete and carries a value of 1. If a student misses an assessment because they were out sick, the teacher would likely enter an M until the student makes it up. If the student never makes it up, or if a student turns in an incomplete assignment, the teacher would enter the I to indicate that they have no work or evidence from the student to determine their level of proficiency, and thus the report will show that the student did not make progress. To wrap up our grading scale, a quick quiz. If you can explain why we use a 4-point scale instead of a 100-point scale, identify which number represents proficient in our grade scale, and explain the major differences between our 1, 2, 3, and 4, even if using the bike riding analogy, then you are proficient in understanding our grade scale. Thank you for watching. A huge thank you to Sawyer and Camden Hills for starring in the applause video, and I'll see you next week for part 3 of our grading series.